pets, and rental housing. So first, let's start off about the department, about LA Animal Services. Mission and vision statement: to promote and protect the health, safety, and welfare of animals and people in the city of Los Angeles. I love our vision statement. We envision the day when every pet born has a good home and is cared for all its life, and no person is ever endangered by an animal. This was one of the first things we teach in training, and one of the reasons I stuck with the department. I love that vision statement. Here, let's look into some of our department divisions. We have 6 animal shelters in the city. So no matter where you're at within the city of Los Angeles, we don't serve the greater county regions, but within the city of Los Angeles, these would be the shelters that you want to check out. So you're probably already looking at this and you can identify which one you're closest to. We have the West Valley Shelter in Chatsworth, the East Valley Shelter over in Van Nuys, the West LA Shelter just outside of Santa Monica there in West LA. North Central Shelter, that's where I'm at right here. We're kind of over near Dodger Stadium. We cover the downtown region. There's our Harbor Shelter. So if you're down further south in kind of the uniquely zoned districts of Los Angeles, you might be in the Harbor. And of course, Chesterfield Square Shelter, they're going to cover a lot of South Los Angeles for us. We have field services. This is our animal control officers that handle service calls for stray, owned, wild, exotic, and livestock. Either they're at large, they're sick, or they're injured in some form of distress. Sometimes they're attacking other people or other animals. Sometimes they're fighting each other. They could just be in traffic or on freeway, so those are emergency calls. We assist other agencies with animal issues. I don't know if any of you guys have seen in the during the last storms when LAFD used our smart rescue team to help pull a horse out of a sinkhole. That's something we partner with. And we conduct investigations, whether it's animal neglect, abuse, cruelty, hoarding, animal fighting, permits, distance, as well as dangerous animals. So we're the people that you contact if a dog has bitten you and you need to have information on that. We have specialized operations teams that range from licensing and canvassing to permits, all sorts of things that handle, pet shops, boarding facilities, that sort of thing. A wildlife team that can help educate and also deal with wildlife activities. Training division, emergency management division for handling emergencies again, just like we did during the last storms. Event outreach division. And we have a smart specialized mobile animal rescue team. They were the ones that helped out with the horse rescue that I mentioned just a little while ago. And the VERT team, Volunteer Equine Emergency Response Team. And you'll see them used a lot in evacuations and in fires and floods and those sort of things too. So lots of specialized operations. Within our shelter services, so inside our shelters, they handle intake and care of various domestic, wild, and exotic animals. So all those animals that we pick up from the streets, they've got to come in and they have to be cared for. Stray and owner surrenders. So if it's just running loose on the street or if someone can't care for it anymore, they take those. Obviously, there's adoptions. Our New Hope program, we have more than 300 nonprofit partners who help us find homes for shelter pets. So they help us with our keep our population down to a reasonable number. We have a foster program where folks can take dogs out of the shelter, dogs and cats, and keep them at their house until they're ready for an adopter. Mobile pet adoptions, the volunteer program, we're always accepting volunteers to come in and help clean and walk the animals, walk the dogs. And of course, our clerical staff, who's responsible for the process of adoptions, owner surrenders, licensing, and permit fees. They're the ones who make sure that all our papers are filed and that we actually operate. And then, of course, there's the medical division. You can't keep animals without keeping them healthy. So we have veterinarians and registered RVTs at all shelters. They handle intakes, exams, vaccinations, flea and tick prevention, microchips and spay and neuter, medical treatment, surgeries if necessary, but they'll also assist officers in investigations with cruelty exams and necropsies to find cause of death and that sort of thing. Moving on. Administrative or admin services, they're going to handle our licensing and breeders permits, commission meetings, public relations, they handle our website, social media, marketing, fundraising, grants. And we have a hearings division. So barking dog and dangerous animal administrative hearings, animal neglect, cruelty, pre and post seizure hearings. So those are various hearings that you may come across as a citizen if you're involved in some sort of investigation, whether it's from a dog bite or if we've had to take your animals under the penal code there for animal abuse. So we have a hearings division for that. Now let's get on to, now that you know a little bit more about our department, let's move forward to the main topic, pets and rental housing. What are pets? Pets are companion animals kept primarily for a person's company or protection. Many are considered a member of the family, right? That's definitely how I see it. During the economic downturn, when so many families were losing housing or downsizing, which including having to give up a companion animal, it was said that this was the most difficult sacrifice a family had to make. It was demonstrated that children were able to accept a lot of changes if they had the security of their dependable and loving pet. So here we'll talk a little bit about that, benefits of animals to humans. So this is for us. These are things that our pets give to us. First is companionship, and I think that one's pretty obvious. Elderly adults who otherwise have no social interactions, that's a perfect example of folks who really benefit from the companionship. A lot of times when the kids move out, being able to nurture something in the home is very valuable, and animals provide that companionship. They provide emotional support, provide support and unconditional love, right? We've all experienced that. We've all heard the expression, we don't deserve dogs. It actually helps your health. So it can lower your blood pressure and decrease stress as well, too. So not only are there emotional and psychological benefits, but there's physiological health benefits to it as well, to owning pets. Children exposed to pets are less likely to develop allergies. Excuse me. Children raised with animals tend to develop a stronger immune system. So those go hand in hand there. And improve social skills. People like to talk about their pets if they're too shy to talk about anything else. That's good advice for anyone looking into icebreakers and social work. Talk about your pets. People love talking about their pets, right? Heart attack patients with pets tend to have better recovery rates. I could speak to that myself. I have heart health issues and heart disease, and I have a support animal as a result, and it's great. It's definitely a benefit to having. Dogs can be your personal trainer. Walking your dog increases losing or maintaining a healthy weight. Absolutely. If you want to pick up jogging, get a dog that likes to run, and then do right by the dog and actually take it for running, and it's gonna force you to move. Pets provide a sense of purpose for the elderly who care for them and also offer exercise opportunities. So not only just jogging, but for some of us, just getting off the couch and going out for a 10 to 15-minute walk is a lot more exercise than what we do if we wouldn't have a pet. So it's a really great way to just get up off the couch and get you moving is take that dog for 1 or 2 walks a day. Pets boost overall mood and bring feelings of joy and happiness. Children learn responsibility and compassion. But that's kind of more general information for the public. I also want to address information that we could give to landlords, benefits to landlords for actually allowing pets. The easy perception is that landlords are not going to want any pets whatsoever, but that's pretty short-sighted thinking, and there are actually benefits to landlords for allowing pets, and I'd like to go over a few of those. First, tenants in pet-friendly housing stayed an average of 46 months over 18 months. So someone who has a pet in a stable situation is more likely to stay there than someone without a pet. So that's a considerable difference. So it's able to keep that occupancy up. The vacancy rate is lower. Renters are willing to pay a premium to cover any extra costs. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with pet rent and those sort of things. And as you're aware, a lot of landlords do charge that. Increased demand due to shortage of pet-friendly rentals. So it's also a benefit, right? You're not excluding you're not excluding a certain population just because they have pets. So a number of people, if you don't allow pets, you're really limiting the amount of people that can actually rent from that apartment, because a lot of people aren't going to give up their dog if it means that they have to, if that's the only way that they could live in that apartment. So increased demand due to shortage of pet-friendly rentals is definitely a benefit. Responsible pet owners make more responsible tenants as they are less likely to do anything that could jeopardize their tenancy. It's the same, it's a family, right? So it's people with other responsibilities besides just themselves. Extra income from pet fees, right? They could charge more. Pet deposits to offset costs for cleaning when tenants move out as well, too. So it's all common things that we see if we live in Los Angeles. They get more response to advertising if pet friendly. Again, they're not limiting, they're not excluding that great swath of population that owns pets. Pet owners usually spend more time at home and contribute to increased security in your area. That's an interesting one too. Dogs that make noise, while at times it can be a nuisance, it also is a deterrent for crime as well. So definitely something worth mentioning. Pets with good manners / good grooming usually have responsible owners who care about their surroundings and take care of their living environment. Good pet keepers are also good tenants. So that's some good information there for landlords. But let's also look at some additional info and considerations. So the size of the pet is not an indicator of a pet's behavior. Large dogs can be couch potatoes and small dogs can be high energy. There is no such thing as a dangerous dog breed. I want to repeat that. There is no such thing as a dangerous dog breed, okay? Breed is not predictive of an individual dog's behavior, but prevents some great renters living in your community. Dogs need to be treated as individuals. They all have their own unique personalities, just like humans. We all know there are breed traits, but to say that one breed in particular is dangerous, that is not accurate representation, and it just doesn't mesh with the facts. Federal and state laws recognize the value of the human/animal bond and include legal protections that may apply to some of your pet owning residents. So, be familiar with laws such as the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. And remember, a disability does not have to be visually observable. Ensure your pet policies are not violating these acts. Set clear standards of care to avoid misunderstandings with pet owning tenants. And here's something else to consider. 63% of pet owners have more than one pet. Set policies that treat pets as part of families, because this is how your tenants will see them. Set standards to encourage responsible pet ownership, such as spay and neuter, proof of updated vaccinations, and current licensing. So you don't have to restrict pets from being on the premises at all, but you can require that any pets that you have there are licensed or spayed and neutered, and have their vaccines. And that's just good for the public health of your neighborhood, if that's something that you can control. All right, now pet owners, here's some information for you to get ready for your landlord. It's a good idea to provide a resume for your dog and cat, just a real simple, quick hits, right? Is the dog or cat spayed and neutered? Does it have a microchip? Include current vaccination records, include current City of Los Angeles licensing with a photo, and you could give a detailed description. Training, you describe the training that it's received: basic obedience, crate trained, canine good citizen, any service animal stuff will go in here as well. References, if you have previous landlords or vets or groomers or boarding or daycare facility or old neighbors. And if you have pet insurance, list that as well. What else can you do? I would also add on here to add on your renter's insurance. So sometimes, since pets are considered property, there are certain areas of renter's insurance that cover pets and pet damage. Not all, you have to check with your insurance provider, but it's worth putting that on there as well. What else can you do? Offer to sign and agree that the landlord can stop. Offer to sign and agree that the landlord can stop by anytime without appointment to verify sanitation. So that's something you can offer to put your landlord at ease. Landlord, these are questions, and these are some steps you could take when you're ready to interview a tenant with pets. Landlords should meet and interview dogs along with the rest of the family. Observe the dog to see if it is friendly and polite. Chances are that the tenant will be nervous because getting your okay is very important. So keep that in mind. Animals read body languages. That's something I teach all of our officers too, is that, they're not going to respond the way they would to, a friend coming over for visit because we're officers. So the dogs may be a little bit different as well because their owner is nervous to interact with you. So the more you can do ease that tension going into it, the better that interaction is going to be. Now let's think about other pets, not just dogs and cats, right? We keep a lot of pets in the city of Los Angeles. There's pocket pets, exotics, and reptiles. Other pet consideration depend on whether it is a multi-unit dwelling versus single for some species. Reptiles, you may need to consider if it needs an outside environment. Birds, depending on species of bird, noise level could be an issue with other tenants. I don't know if anyone's ever lived next to a macaw and certain parrots. They get really, really loud. Some species require special permits to keep. So it's worth considering other pets in the city of LA. Now we'll cover kind of briefly here. We'll go over the Fair Housing Act. Fair Housing Act is federal law that prevents discrimination against tenants in their homes. Under FHA, a disability is defined as physical or mental impairment which significantly limits a person's major life activities. Even if the lease says no pets or restricted pets, landlords are required to make what is called reasonable accommodations to allow pets who serve as assistants or emotional needs animals. That's not the same as a service animal, so it's a lower standard there, but they have to make reasonable accommodation. Now, so here's a service animal. Service animals are categorized as animals trained to do a specific task for their owner. The most common is a guide dog, right? We've all heard of seeing eye dogs, but they could be a number of animals. Service animals are allowed in public places and are either a dog or a miniature horse that has been fully trained by an accredited facility and have special protection laws. So service animals are not the kind that you can print up any information. It's not just a doctor's note. These are trained animals by an accredited facility and have special protection laws. Now, an assistance or an emotional needs animal is different. This can be any type of animal, so it's not limited to dogs and mini horses, and does not need to be individually trained or certified to perform any service. The emotional and or physical benefits from the animal living in the home are what qualify the animals. These are animals that work, assist, and or perform tasks and services for the benefit of a person with disability or provide emotional support that improves the symptoms of a disability. A letter from a medical doctor or therapist is all that is needed to classify the animal as an assistance or emotional needs animal. So again, service animals, we're talking about trained by an accredited facility, and service or emotional needs or emotional support animals or assistance animals, those come from a letter from a medical doctor or a therapist. Assistance or emotional needs animals can detect a seizure disorder and alert, detect a seizure disorder and alert the owner to get prepared. They alleviates a person's depression or anxiety, or reduces a person's stress-induced pain. Example, a bird who alerts a person with hearing disabilities when someone is at the door. FHA does not include, or excuse me, let me backtrack. I was reading note. FHA does include a few restrictions where this act does not apply. Check the FHA website for more information. Landlords cannot charge any extra rent or pet deposits or any other fees due to pet ownership when it comes to those type of protected animals. These type of animals are not considered pets. So that it would only be a security deposit that they could offer, but they can't charge some other fees. Let's look at the basic laws here. So these are some municipal codes. If you're ever curious about these, you just type this into Google, LAMC. Those are municipal codes, and you could search leash law and it'll pull up the laws on it. But here they are. So this is a good list of our statutes. Excuse me, our municipal codes. 5306.2 subsection A, that's our leash law. 53.49, that's our defecation law. You can't, it's illegal to allow your dog to defecate anywhere in public property without picking it up. 53.15.3 subsection A is our licensing requirement. 53.15.2 subsection B is regarding breeder's permit. So all intact dogs, meaning if they haven't been spayed or neutered, have to have a breeder's permit, regardless of if you're breeding them or not. If they're capable of it, they need the permit. 53.63 regarding noise nuisance. Now the department doesn't investigate noise complaints, but we do investigate nuisance barking. So There's a procedure on that. You can find more information on laanimalservices.com as well, because as much as we want pets in rental homes and in families, they also have to be good neighbors too. 53.34 defines the violations of aggressive dogs. So what happens when dogs bite people outside or other dogs? 53.06.1 restricts the number of dogs and cats that a person can keep in the city of Los Angeles. And 53.59 is for distance requirements. And that would mean for certain animals, goats, sheep, birds, chickens, roosters, if you happen to have a pet seal, any noise, a lot of noise emitting animals, there's specific distances that they have to meet from both your dwelling and the nearest neighbor dwelling. So you could learn more about those there. And here's our contact. So you could contact us at laanimalservices.com. The website's got, if you go into the About Us section, you could find all of our key personnel, all of my supervisors and that sort, and all the locations as well. This 888 number goes to all the shelters. So it's the one number for all shelters, makes it easy to find there. You could reach us on Facebook. You could hit us up on Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, at LA City Pets.
Thanks, Lieutenant Lewis. That was great. We'll move into the next presentation. This afternoon, we have Margot Parker Elder. She's with the Housing Rights Center. So take it away, Margot.
All right. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here today. So I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet, but we do have a lot of information in these slides, so you can always come back and reference it. So to start, I'm going to introduce the Housing Rights Center. And for those who may not be familiar with us, we are the nation's largest nonprofit civil rights organization dedicated to fair housing. So we were founded in 1968, and that's when Congress passed the Fair Housing Act. We serve Los Angeles County and Ventura County, and our free services are available in many languages. One of our main services is housing counseling. So this is when, both landlords and tenants can go ahead and they can contact us, contact our counselors, and receive legal information, resources, and referrals on housing issues. So this service is private and confidential and free for anyone to call. Sometimes someone's calling and what they're experiencing is maybe discrimination, or they need help with their reasonable accommodation request for their disability. In certain circumstances, we actually have departments that can really help out with that, offer mediation, file a complaint with HUD, or even litigate. So if you do want to get in contact with one of our counselors, the information's on the screen here. You can call us up. You can send us an email, and if you are sending us an email, we ask that you include your city, where you're currently living, as well as a brief description of your question or your issue. Another, just two things I want to highlight before really moving on, is Project Place. So this is something that we can all sign up for. It's our free newsletter of affordable rental listings in LA County and Ventura County. We also do a number of workshops on fair housing and, local rent control and things like that. So you could always take a look at workshops that we maybe have in your area. All right, so let's get into it. So what is fair housing? Fair housing is the ability for people of similar income levels to have available to them the same housing choices, regardless of personal characteristics, which we're going to talk about briefly. So fair housing laws really apply in so many different circumstances. So if you're renting, you're buying, you're lending, and even if you're just a prospective applicant and you're thinking, oh, maybe I want to live here, you have fair housing protections. You also have fair housing protections in so many different types of residential dwellings. So apartments, condos, houses, duplexes, the list goes on. And so we on the screen here are different protected classes, or we call them protected characteristics. And so these are characteristics that we have protected all across the nation. And the one that we're going to be talking about today in more depth is actually about disability. But we do have protections based on our race, our religion, our color or skin tone, our sex, our national origin or ethnicity, our familial status, so that's whether we have, minors under 18 in the home with us, and if we have a disability. So everything that I just mentioned, we have nationwide. We have those protections nationwide. But in California, we have additional protections. So we have protections based on our ancestry, our marital status, our sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, source of income, our medical condition, and our military or veteran status. So I'm just going to briefly touch on source of income. And the question is why? Why would I bring this up? Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is because people who are maybe requesting a service or support animal with them also may be receiving some kind of government rent subsidy that would put them under using this form of source of income. So they have additional protections. And so what this law means in California is that all lawful sources of income cannot be used as the basis for differential treatment. And so that means it needs to come from a legal avenue and not a crime. And so what would differential treatment mean? Well, that would mean advertising statements that say, hey, you can't use that source of income here. It could also be a landlord or a housing provider refusing to accept your form of payment, or refusing to approve applications from you because you're using that source of income. And this one's new. In California, under SB 267, landlords are actually not allowed to require a credit check of applicants who are using a government rent subsidy. So they need to offer you a different way to prove that you can pay besides a credit check. So we do tons of presentations on this. I would encourage you, if you're interested in learning more, to contact our counselors or sign up for one of our workshops where we go into this in more depth. All right, so what are some prohibited practices that we've talked about based on the protected characteristics that we've touched on, right? And so that would be a landlord or housing provider refusing to sell or rent housing to you because, let's say, you have a disability. It could also be saying that housing is unavailable when it is available, having different terms or rules for you because of your protected class. It could be discriminatory statements or advertising. It could also be steering, which is when, a landlord or a housing provider says, you know what, the schools in this neighborhood aren't that great. Why don't you look somewhere else? Or, you can only rent the bottom floor because you have minor children with you, or because you have a disability, or whatever your protected class is. It could also be discrimination based on association, threats, intimidation, harassment, or retaliation, denying a reasonable accommodation or modification, which we're going to talk about, or otherwise making housing unavailable. All right, so let's talk more about reasonable accommodations and modifications. So disability is actually defined by impact. And so disability in California is defined, it's a legal term with a specific definition. And California's definition is actually more inclusive than the federal law's definition. So in California, a disability is just a mental or physical impairment that limits a major life activity. So disability is defined by the impact it has on the individual. And to receive accommodations or modifications, you don't need to talk about your diagnosis, but what you do have to talk about are the impacts of your disability on your ability to get equal use and enjoyment out of your housing. So on the left here, we have, a column, and it's all these different ways a disability can impact you, right? So it can impact your ability to see, hear, walk, breathe, perform manual tasks, care for yourself, learn, or speak. And on the right side, we have examples of disabilities that could cause these types of impacts, right? So they could be orthopedic, they could be visual, speech, or hearing impairments, cerebral palsy, having autism or being on the spectrum, cancer, heart disease, HIV, or related conditions, maybe a mental or an emotional illness, or substance use disorder. And so all of this is important, defining how impacts are different from your disability, because, all of this ties into how tenants or applicants, they have the ability to request accommodations, which are exceptions to rules or changes to services, or structural modifications in their housing related to their disability. So this is really important because it ensures that tenants with disabilities can get equal use and enjoyment out of their housing. So the reason why we were talking in depth about, the difference between impact and the disability diagnosis is because there's this question of how do I actually get my reasonable accommodation or modification request granted, right? And so if you have a disability and you're requesting an accommodation or a modification to your housing, your landlord could ask you for verification that, your request is medically necessary, but this verification doesn't need to include your diagnosis. So basically, it can come from a reliable third party familiar with your disability, but it just needs to talk about the impacts of that disability on your ability to get equal use and enjoyment out of your housing. And so when a landlord receives this request, they consider two things. And the first thing is this request, is what they're requesting necessary for the tenant? Is it directly related to the tenant's disability, the impacts of their disability? And this is important. Does it improve accessibility, safety, quality of life, or at the very least, enable them to live there at all? So the second thing landlords or housing providers can consider is this request reasonable to grant? And so this idea of something being reasonable to grant really is on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the landlord can provide and the housing accommodation in question. So the things that they're considering when they're, wondering, is this request reasonable to grant, is does this not create an excessive burden on the landlord? Is it not too expensive? Maybe it's a huge administrative burden for the landlord. Is it within the scope of housing services? And the last one is, does it fundamentally alter the business? And so if a landlord considers both of these things and they decide, it is too much of a burden or it does change the nature of our housing, we can't provide your specific request. The landlord needs to engage in a good faith dialogue with the tenant to figure out what they can provide. We call this a reasonable alternative. And so here we have a recap of, what we've discussed, as well as some common examples of accommodations and modifications. So again, accommodations are changes to a service or a policy. So they're changes to the rules, essentially. And in these situations, the landlord pays the cost if there are any. So importantly, it's important to remember that service animals and emotional support animals actually fall under accommodations. And because of that, because the landlord pays any costs associated with accommodations, you should not pay a pet fee. So modifications, as we discussed, are physical changes to the unit or the building. Some common examples are installing a wheelchair ramp, grab bars, lowering the countertop, maybe installing a visual doorbell. And in these circumstances, the tenant pays the costs and may be asked to reverse the changes when they move out. An exemption to this is in federally funded housing. In those circumstances, the tenant would not have to pay for this modification. And, if the modification makes the unit more accessible for future tenants, you could make the case that you shouldn't have to reverse it. All right, so here's some common questions, especially about emotional support animals. So is an emotional support animal, an ESA, a pet? And we talked about this a little bit before, but the answer is no, right? An emotional support animal is an animal that provides emotional, cognitive, or other similar support to a person with a disability to assist them in managing the symptoms of their disability. Is an ESA, an emotional support animal, a service animal, right? So the answer is no. As we talked about, right, a service animal is trained to perform a specific task to assist an individual with a disability. So a guide dog assists people who are blind or have low vision with navigating. Signal dogs, I wrote digs, but it's dogs, alert individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing to sounds. ESAs are not specifically trained to assist a person with a disability. Can a housing provider prohibit a tenant from having an ESA? So housing providers can have rules regarding pets, including a no pet policy. However, if a tenant has a disability related need for an ESA, the housing provider must consider the animal as a reasonable accommodation. Must an ESA be registered to qualify for a reasonable accommodation? So there's no legal requirement that an ESA must be certified or registered. When may a housing provider deny a request for an ESA? So after a tenant has shown that they have a disability-related need for an emotional support animal, the housing provider may deny the request only if, and number one, permitting the ESA would cause an undue financial or administrative burden. Number two, permitting the ESA would fundamentally alter the housing business. Or three, when the animal constitutes a direct threat to the health or safety of others. And so an example of this is, a big risk of bodily harm or substantial physical damage to the property of others. This decision, though, on the part of the landlord or the housing provider should be made on a case-by-case basis and must be based on credible or objective evidence, not stereotypes or assumptions. Can someone have more than one ESA? So the answer is yes. The tenant must follow the same process, though, of making a reasonable accommodation request, providing verification if the need for multiple emotional support animals is not apparent. The housing provider may consider the same questions. Would this cause an undue financial or administrative burden? Does it change the nature of the housing? Or, is this animal a direct threat to the health and safety of others? Can a housing provider charge a higher fee or higher rent? So the answer is no. They cannot, tenants cannot be charged a pet deposit, pet rent, or additional fees because of, their emotional support animal, even if the housing provider charges other tenants with pets these fees. And the answer, the reason why that is because it's an accommodation. Tenants cannot be required to obtain liability insurance covering the animal. May a housing provider limit the breed, size, or weight of ESAs? So the answer is no. Restrictions on breed, size, or weight of ESAs are prohibited. On a case-by-case basis, though, housing providers may deny a request for an ESA that is a direct threat to the health and safety of others. An example of this is that a policy banning pit bulls would be unlawful, but if a particular pit bull regularly growled and tried to bite other tenants on the property, and the risk of the dog biting someone could not be sufficiently reduced by another reasonable accommodation, the housing provider may be justified in denying a reasonable accommodation for the tenant to keep that particular dog as an ESA. What should I do if I feel my housing provider is discriminating against me, as I'm trying to get my emotional support or service animal? So we encourage everyone to document everything in writing, contact the Housing Rights Center, and you can also file a complaint with CRD, California Civil Rights Department. And I have their information on the screen here. And so lastly, this is our information. You could always call our hotline, speak with our counselors, leave a voicemail if no one's able to pick up the phone right at that moment. You can also email us at info@housingrightscenter.org. We also have frequent workshops, you can attend, and we also have clinics that you can attend. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, or formerly Twitter and Facebook. All right, thank you, everyone.